So, the 2026 F1 engine regulations could be in a spot of trouble after some simulation runs found some big issues with the proposed designs. For those of you that don't know, the 2026 regulations are a huge change to Formula One with a number of big alterations to the engine regs and aero regs. The big change for the engines is the reduction to zero fossil fuels. Currently, F1 engines run on 10% ethanol and 90% fossil fuels, but in 26, that will change considerably, and all of the engines will run on 100% ethanol. This in itself is a big change and a huge challenge for all the engine manufacturers to get the same power and performance using no fossil fuels. Not only that, but there is a big change in the split between combustion power and power from the energy recovery systems. Currently, the ICE, or internal combustion engine, provides around 850 brake horsepower, and then the hybrid provides the rest, around 160. In 2026, though, it's going to be almost a 50-50 split, with the ICE providing 530 and the hybrid system giving the remaining 470. Alongside that, there are plans to make the cars a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter, not by a huge amount, but we'll take anything we can get. The big change, though, was active aero, and that's where the problems have come from. The idea was to have aero that moved, to reduce drag down the straights, to compensate for any power deficiency brought about by the new engines. But then it would go to its highest downforce level in the corners. The current cars have a DRS system, obviously, with a movable rear wing flap. So the initial plan was to restrict that active aero to the rear of the car because it made the most sense for simplicity. The issues, though, come from simulations run by the teams. The current F1 teams have had a base car called the Fangio model that they could run in their simulators based on the proposed engine systems. But the drivers were reporting it to be undrivable, saying that when the cars were running under full power at the lowest drag setting, it was impossible to get the power down the straight, and they were spinning out in a straight line. Supposedly, it was also claimed that the cars would spin even in the slightest of curves. Now that, obviously, is not good. The shift in aero balance when the cars were going to that lowest downforce level was supposedly 3 times what's currently done by the DRS system. So it's really no surprise that the cars are pretty rough to drive. Interestingly, though, Red Bull have also reported that based on their simulations on the engine side of things, the cars will run out of power at the end of straights. Obviously, we're in a situation now for 2026 where a lot of the power is going to be coming from the battery side of things, almost half, which is nowhere near what we've got now. So we're relying heavily on the battery and the energy recovery system. We're now in a situation where Formula One is trying to build the chassis of the car around the engines. And in fact, they're trying to compensate for the lack of power in the engines by changing the chassis. We're basically going from 90% fossil fuels to zero. And there's obviously an anticipation the engines aren't going to be quite as powerful, and there's going to be, potential weaknesses in the energy recovery system. And to compensate for that, they're trying to make sure that the cars are going to be quick down the straights with this active aero. Now, the problem here is that an unnamed insider who provided the information on the simulations even went as far as to say that the 2026 cars were having to be driven so conservatively on the simulator because of this aero imbalance that they would end up being slower than Formula 2 cars. The solution that's on the cards right now, apparently the FIA have visited the team's headquarters, they've spoken to the teams about it, trying to engage in this, and the theory is that they're going to try and move some of this movable aero to the front of the car to compensate for the imbalance and the aero offset. The problem is, though, we're kind of running against the clock here. There's a real rush because the regulations are meant to be finalized by June this year. We're just past the first week of April, and these are meant to be finalized. Now, this is not something you want to be rushing around trying to work out. These are complex regulations, and the teams aren't allowed to be working on their 2026 cars just yet anyway. So So the teams aren't losing out, but it feels to me like it's not something you can just fix within a month. And it's also something that perhaps has been going on for a little while, because the teams, I imagine, would have had these cars running the simulator already, probably months ago. Christian Horner recently spoke about the new regulations and how the FIA and the FOM have handled them. He said, "I think there's been some good progression. I think the FIA have taken on board some of the feedback and some alterations have been made. We're waiting for the chassis regulations, which will be a fundamental part of the 2026 package now, and how that interacts with these power units. The various working groups are working hard on that, and it's important that we conclude something in the near future. As for the concerns emerging from the simulations, well," Horner said, "the rules are the same for everybody at the end of the day, so it's how you apply them and translate them. I don't think we're afraid of whatever the rules will be, as it's the same starting point for everybody. When they're finalised, that's when we'll no doubt discover whatever issues there are with the rules, but that's no different to any other regulation change." Now, it's possible this can be dealt with before June, but it sounds like a fairly big issue to me, and obviously I'm not an expert in this matter, but the FIA needs to get it right. We're going to have these regulations now for a number of years, and we can't have a situation where we rush to get this done and we then find a fundamental flaw in the regulations. That could be, a serious issue with serious ramifications. So they need to take their time and they need to get it right. So the question is, could we see a delay to these regulations then? Well, that in itself would be a big issue. There are so many moving parts in place. Audi are coming to Formula One specifically for these engine regulations, and that's in 2026. Honda are leaving after 2025. Well, they're leaving Red Bull. They're going to Aston Martin. For 2026, Red Bull have a partnership with Ford for the new engine regulations. Now, if these were delayed for a year, surely that would leave Red Bull then without an engine, which obviously couldn't happen. So delaying the regulations isn't that simple either, because there's a lot of moving parts there and a lot of complications. But also, there's only a month to get them fixed and finalised. No solution is simple, but it is a race against the clock to get it sorted. And hopefully they can. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.